Welcome to Discovering Creativity. And thank you for being with us, Cindy. And Laura, you can take it from here. See you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. First question we have is what got you into the study of creativity?
So back in 1999, I was touring the country with a Broadway show called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum as a professional actor. And I realized after 89 cities and 170 shows that I no longer wanted to be an actor. And someone said, "What would you like to learn about next?" And I said, "I want to learn about creativity." So back in 1999, there wasn't very much out on creativity, but there was one book. It was a popular press book called, it was Julia Cameron's The Artist Way. And I knew about creativity from that and that alone. So that's all I knew of creativity. But I started on a search for where can I study creativity in a graduate program. And I'm from Buffalo, New York, and I found the oldest degree granting program in creativity in the world in Buffalo, New York at SUNY Buffalo State. So I called up and I said, "I'm interested in your programs in creativity." And they said, "Well, we're starting classes tomorrow. Would you like to start as a non-matriculated student?" And I said, "Sure." And so the next day, within 24 hours of me saying I want to study creativity, I was sitting in my first graduate course.
Wow. Quick. I
It was
like it.
quick.
I
Yes.
like it. All right. How do you feel the creativity movement has influenced our current educational system?
Well, it's interesting. Back in the 1980s, E. Paul Torrance, who is known as the father of creativity in education, wrote a chapter called The Quiet Hum of Creativity in the Classroom. And it was all about how it's really not talked about that much. And despite the fact that the World Economic Forum is saying that creativity is one of the most important skills, if not the most important skills, but always in the top three skills for the future, creativity is not seen as important at the high level. Like if we talk to schools and we talk to a lot of schools about bringing creativity into the classroom, there's so many misconceptions of what creativity is that they don't really see the value. So we have to, oh boy.
Okay, so you were talking about the creativity movement influencing our education system. Okay.
Yes. So I mentioned E. Paul Torrance. So let me see if I can pick up there. E. Paul Torrance, who was known as the father of creativity in education, wrote a chapter back in the 1980s that talked about the quiet hum of creativity in education. And unfortunately, not much has changed since then, despite the fact that creativity and creative thinking and problem solving are at the top of the World Economic Forums for future skills. And yet, I spent a lot of time in education, and most educators still don't really understand the benefits and value, or even what creativity is. So that is, it's still a major problem. So, despite the fact that has been enormous amounts of creativity research done in the last 75 years, when J.P. Guilford in the 1950s said in his inaugural address there needed to be more research in creativity. There's been a significant amount of research done. There's 20 journals in the field. People still don't really understand what creativity is and why it's valuable. So that's the unfortunate piece. But I spend every day of my career working toward changing that.
Good. That's good. All right. Are there certain education levels like elementary, middle, high, secondary, or whatever, or geographic locations that you found that seem to be more interested in involving creativity in education than maybe other levels or locations?
So I have a podcast called Fueling Creativity in Education, and we have been in existence for about 3.5 years. And we have interviewed over 100 people, practitioners, educators, administrators, and researchers in the field of creativity. And I think, in my opinion, the place I've seen it the most vibrant is Australia. And I've met a lot of people from Australia that are doing great things, the creative schools, creative programs, creativity in higher ed. So I've seen some really great things in Australia.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
All right. What have you learned from publishing books on creativity?
Well, the books that I've written, and I've done four, one for parenting, My Sandwich is a Spaceship, Creative Thinking for Parents with Young Children, two for K through 12 educators on weaving creative thinking into K through 12 education, and then a higher ed book on infusing creative thinking into higher education. All of my books focus on a creative thinking skill set that was originally developed by E. Paul Torrance in the book The Search for Satori. I've taken those 20 skills, I've done lots and lots of workshops and conferences to help really think about these 20 skills like curiosity and openness and risk taking and tolerating ambiguity, and taking those skills and embedding them into the existing curriculum. So when teachers come to me and they say, well, how do I bring creativity into the classroom and how do I do it when I'm already pressed for time? So the way that I do that is to weave these creative thinking skills into the content area. And that is the focus of my four books.
Cool. All right. What do you think are the main obstacles that students face when they're trying to learn creative thinking?
Well, first of all, I think it's more about the teacher obstacles. If we were to look at it in that framework, teachers have challenges with bringing creativity into the classroom because especially in the United States, we're bound by a lot of standards. We're trying to teach students how to find the one right answer instead of exploring options. So I think that is the first barrier to bringing creativity into the classroom. Oftentimes, highly creative students might be creative in their classroom, but teachers look at that as being defiant, which is unfortunate because if a teacher looks at a student and a student says, well, I don't want to do it this way, I want to show you what I've learned this way, then they might be showcasing it based on their interests or passions, which is a great way to go. But instead, what we try to do is get students to all think in the same way and produce in the same way, and that's not necessarily helpful in fostering creative thinking in the classroom.
What are some of the successes you have experienced teaching and training creative thinking?
Well, it's interesting. I taught at the undergraduate and graduate level for 20 years at SUNY Buffalo State, and I think it's wonderful when I hear back from students who I worked with many years ago. And just recently, I received a LinkedIn message from one of my students who said, Cindy, I know I had you as an undergraduate student. It was about 17 years ago. And he said, but I still use what I learned in your class. And every time I go up for an evaluation at my job, they talk about my creativity. And I'm really grateful for the work of myself and my department that I worked in with my colleagues because it really helped me be more creative in my life. So that's just a simple example. I think a lot of people, especially when you're studying creativity as a discipline, you really find yourself in terms of being able to explore opportunities and possibilities in life versus just, I have to do one thing, but it's about exploring different opportunities.
How do you go about teaching creativity to children so they can foster creative thinking habits when they grow up?
So I typically start with kids in curiosity because curiosity can lead to creativity. I think it's a beautiful conduit to creativity. So if we think about curiosity, I love to talk to students about what they're curious about and what questions they might ask about things. And so often, especially in the educational system, you talk to a 4 or 5 year old and they have endless questions. But you talk to a fourth grader and they don't have as many questions. So why is that? Well, a lot of it is sort of natural development of who we are as humans. When we start to become of an age of 11 and 12 and you start worrying about what your peers think, you don't want to seem like you're asking things that might be embarrassing or wrong or incorrect. So I really try to foster an environment for curiosity, to explore new ideas, to explore things that don't exist, to play around with possibilities. And I think that's a great place to start with kids.
Kind of follow-up question to that. How do you feel like there's the adult influence of squashing that creativity and or that curiosity and those questions? Do you feel like parents and teachers and coaches, whatever, have a role in as they grow? They are kind of what you're talking about, how we want kids to learn and do things a certain way. Do you feel like that kind of contributes to the curiosity and the questions, leaving the children as they grow?
Absolutely. And I think it comes twofold. I think the first part is modeling creativity. So if I walk into a classroom and I tell my students, well, I've got to tell you a story about how I failed yesterday. Or I have two children, they're now teenagers, but I remember teaching a class once and it was just I just bombed it. And my daughter said, "What happened?" And I said, "I bombed it. Here's what I did wrong. I did this wrong and this wrong." And so talking and modeling about creativity, about risks that you take, about listening to new ideas, about embracing ambiguity, really listening, being cognitively flexible, all of these skills you have to be able to model. And the second part of that is you have to really think through how you direct your students so that it's more of a facilitation than a direction. So let's explore these questions. And maybe students have, we've all, anyone who's taught for more than a month has that student who asks incessant questions and just doesn't stop asking questions. And that might not always be the right space and time. But having a place in your classroom, this is something really easy a K through 12 teacher could do. And I even did this in my graduate class, is have a parking lot. So you have a flip chart up on the wall and it says your questions are our parking lot. And if something comes up, like a question that someone wants to explore, you say, you know what, can you capture that and put it up on the parking lot? So it shows that they have value, but you're not stopping in the middle of the lesson to listen to a student ask 15 questions about something, right? So you're giving them that space without taking away from what your goals and objectives of the lesson are.
I love that. That's cool. Okay. What is the biggest barrier that you're facing in your field?
I think the biggest barrier goes back to people not really understanding what creativity is. And I think it's because part of it is when we look at some of the myths. So creativity is related to the arts. We look at something like if I go into a school and I say I teach creativity, and they say, well, that's for the arts programs or the gifted programs or special education in some capacity. And it's like it's more than that. It's about thinking. It's about looking at things from different perspectives. It's about being cognitively flexible, which is about managing change. It's about being playful and humorous. It's about coming up with more than just one idea to a solution. And I think for so many people, because they don't understand or they haven't seen the value of it, they don't see it as valuable. So it's interesting. I was working with a nonprofit called Curiosity to Create. We hired someone to go in, a marketing person, a marketing expert to go in and speak with some superintendents about us coming in to talk with them about creativity. And they said, nope, we don't need that creativity stuff. You can talk to our gifted specialist for that. And then they said, well, would you like to know more about getting students more engaged? Would you like to know more about having your students think more independently, being better problem solvers, being more confident in their abilities to think in new ways? Yes, we want all of that. Well, then you want creativity, but they just didn't make that connection.
Going along that, do you feel like kind of the school system and maybe the tradition of the U.S. school system is a big barrier because teachers and administrators, even adults not in the system, we're all kind of schooled and we're kind of in this state that this is the way we learn and this is how we go to school. Do you feel like your work is breaking that down a little bit, or is that still a pretty big barrier for you?
It's a huge barrier. I won't underestimate it. It is a huge barrier that I'm trying to break every day. I do that with the books and the podcast and my website, which is creativityeducation.com, which we have lots of free resources to help you bring creativity into the classroom. But when I look at something like, I don't have time for this. It's like, it really doesn't, you don't need to overhaul your whole curriculum. You don't need a whole set of curricula. You just need to make some small changes. So can you take one worksheet out of your lesson that day and do something that, gets students to think in new ways? And I have lots of warm-up activities on my YouTube station. You can watch, I have so many resources that I just keep building and building. So anytime someone contacts me, I'm like, oh, you need that? You want to talk about that? You want to learn about that? Go here. And it's all free because I want to make it accessible. And I want teachers to be able to embrace it whenever they can and find ways to make those connections.
Do you, this is another question I just thought of. Do you ever work in like college with college students studying to become teachers so that you can help like educate teachers a little bit more in creativity before they're in the classroom? Is that something that you've broken into or?
Teacher training, I think, is essential. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, so many students, so many teachers have not had any experience in bringing creativity into the classroom, and it's not part of most curricula in teacher training. So I think it is important. I've touched upon it. I've done a couple of sessions, but I do think that's a really important space to go to.
Maybe this is a good question for to wrap up, but what are your plans to grow your business and to maybe expand into other places to help spread this awareness?
So I work in different arenas. I work as an independent consultant. So creativity and education is sort of my platform to share my ideas. I have a bunch of colleagues on that platform who also share their ideas. I'm always working on the next 2 or 3 books. I've got sort of 4 books in the pipeline, one on the podcast itself and the 10 tips that come from that. But I think I also work with a nonprofit called Curiosity to Create, and they're also working on specifically within K through 12 on building a network for educators called Curious to Connect. So teachers can come together and share their ideas with one another. There's creative lesson plans, creative courses. So if you're interested in something like that, those of you who are watching, I highly encourage it. And then I work with a company called No Innovation, which focuses on higher ed and bringing creativity into scientific research in higher ed. So I've got sort of those areas that those little ponds that I play in, and hope to have some impact with the work that I do every day.
Yeah, that's a great plan. I like it. Well, that's all the questions we have. So did you have anything last you wanted to wrap up or?
No.
Just sign up? Okay. Well, I thank you so much for your time. Have
All
a
right.
great
Thanks,
day.
Laura. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Bye.